Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. Welcome to Past Virtual Summit 2020. Today my session is on Power Apps and Power Automate, especially on best practices when you're working with databases. Become a Past Pro member and you can unlock exclusive training and networking material. Uh, Join your local Past user groups to learn more about data and analytics. There are SQL Saturdays that are full day training events. Probably you would have attended one before. If not, please do explore them. If you can't attend in-person events, especially during these pandemic times, there are online events. A past marathon, which is a back-to-back webinar event. There are past virtual groups, which are online user groups, and you can also get involved by volunteering to one of these events. Again, please visit past.org for free resources that are available online. At the end of each session, you can evaluate a session or during the whole week. So please do submit your session evaluations by end of Friday, November 20th, and you can also win some prizes by submitting your session evaluations. The link is available on the left-hand side navigation bar. A bit about myself. For those who don't know me, I am Manohar Punna. I am a data platform MVP. I'm also a senior consultant at Servian. I blog, speak at various events, and I also mentor a few members in the community. I currently serve as a vice president on the board at Data Platform Geeks. There are different links to different channels through which you can reach me. So today's agenda is very simple and straightforward. I'll be doing few demos. And in these demos, I'll be explaining the DB best practices when you're working with Power Apps and Power Automate flow, especially when you're connecting to a SQL Server database. The first demo will show the direct connection to a database and some drawbacks when you're doing this. The second demo will show you a simple way of doing that without using direct connections by using flow. The third demo will be a set of complex updates that you can perform across multiple tables by using Power Apps and Flow. So without any further delay, let's jump into the demos. In the first demo, we'll explore the scenario where I want to connect to my database and fetch data from a view which has got a join from, which is basically a select statement joining a couple of tables. I've got a speaker data in one table and my sessions data in another table. So I want to get a unified view across both the tables. So I want to fetch this data from a view. Generally, there wouldn't be any cases where you want to fetch data only from one single table. Sometimes there may be scenarios like that, but mostly for real world use cases, you would fetch data from multiple tables from a database. So let's start by adding a new screen to my app here. I've got an existing app. To add a new data source, so when I add a new screen, it says you need to connect to or insert an item or just connect to your data. When I clicked on connect to data, it will take me to my data pane where I can see all the data sources that I've already added. You can use one of the existing ones or try to connect to one of the from one of the connections that I have. So when I expand connectors, I can see there are various connectors that I have connections to. So let me click on SQL Server and I've got some connections that are already created. So I'll start by selecting the SQL Server connections to my DPS database. So when I click on it, it will show me a list of tables that I've got access to. So these permissions are set for this particular user on the database. So this user can only see the views that I have given permissions to. So I can select the view all sessions and click connect. This will make a connection to that table in the database connection, and that will be my data source. So I've already created this connection, so I'll just click cancel here. But before we step into that demo, let me quickly show what permissions I've got for this user. So I've got a user called API call user, and it that user has got select permissions on specific views, and these were the views that I was able to see when I try to create a data source in my Power Apps Studio. So switching back to Power Apps Studio, I have in my app I've got a connection created for the data source all sessions. I will use this all sessions data source and create a gallery view that will display certain fields from this data source. So in here, I'll go click on insert and insert a gallery with a uh, blank template. Uh, and what I'll do is connect this to my data. So when I click on connect, it will show me the data connections that I have. So data sources that I have. So I'll select all sessions. Now it is linked. The items in my collection in my gallery is coming from this data source. I'll click on edit here and add a couple of text fields to this gallery item. So I've got 3 text fields and I link these fields to the data that is coming from my data source. So I'll say by default this should show me the speaker name, this item.speaker, and then this should show me the title. So that will be almost at the end. There we go. And then the third display item should be the level of my session. So I'll just select this item.level. Now this is linked to my datasets and it's showing the fields that is coming from my dataset. So far it's good. I am able to make the connection and I'm able to display the fields in the gallery. But when I look at the gallery, I'll see all the items that is coming from my view. So what if this view should be dynamic? So it's very hard to control that given that it's coming from a view and there was no option to filter that view when I was selecting the data source. So this is kind of static data sets and it loads everything that is coming from my data source. I can apply filter on top of this gallery, but that only happens after the data is loaded. So that is one of the limitations with this kind of approach. The second thing that I want to demonstrate the second limitation that I want to demonstrate is if I want to update the fields here from this view. So let's start by adding a button and say when I click on this button, update my data source, patch. So patch is a function that we use in Power Apps. And what I want to patch is my data source with the field of say the level. So I want to change the level of a session and that's what I want to update. So this is a text input 8. I should name them better, but for this demo let's keep it as text input 8. So I will use a patch function and now I've got the formula here, patch and data source and the level to text input 8, whatever I'm updating that text input 8 with. Now if you observe, there's a red line that's coming up under the data source, and if I hover on top of it, it says the data source is either read-only or has no primary key. I know my data source has a primary key. The only issue that I've got here is my data source. Because it's a view, Power Apps can't update the views, so it can't run an update statement on a view. So this is the second limitation. So when you use views, you can get multiple fields from multiple tables coming through, but you have still got issues with you can't update views. So views give you an option to get data from multiple tables, but you'll not be able to update those fields by using the view. You can do it with some other approaches, so we'll be looking at the second demo. In the second demo, I'll be taking you through a conference room monitor app and answer one of the questions that we have raised during our first demo. How do you actually make sure that you can actually update the data and do it at one particular record level rather than doing it for the um, whole data set at the same time? So this conference room monitor app is an app that is used by the volunteers during a conference. So I'll quickly walk through the demo of using this app and then show you how this is built. So in this app, I've got two mandatory filters, like what day of the session conference it is and which room is the volunteer in. So let's say this is the second day of the conference and I'm in room called Sphinx. And I can optionally provide a speaker name. Even if I leave it blank, it will still fetch me the results for all the sessions on day 2 in that specific room. So I've got about 5 sessions in this room. So let's say this is the first session that is happening. So I want to log the details for that specific session. And when I click on log details, it fetches more information about that session. And if you observe, there was no load time during this because all of this data was already loaded when I first fetched the data for that specific day. Because I'm filtering down to that specific day and a specific room, I'm not fetching more than 5 records at a time. So this way I'm actually filtering down and making sure I'm not fetching a lot of data which I don't need. And here I can update the specific fields, like as a room volunteer, I need to note down the actual start time and end time of the session, how many attendees were in the room, and whether there were any specific issues for that session during that session. This helps the organizers in a couple of ways. One is they will know the issues as they happen, so they can monitor this data behind the scenes. And the room volunteers don't have to run between rooms and to find technical help or any other help during the conference. So this app was built for those specific use cases. So let's close this app and see how we are using um, Power Automate Flow for this functionality. The first use case is filtering down the data and fetching the data. As the volunteers, I don't want to give the volunteers access as an organizer. I don't want to give access to the volunteers to be able to edit any data directly on the database. I want to make sure that they are doing specific functionality like fetching the data from the tables by using stored procedure and updating records only through a specific stored procedure. So they only have execute access on a couple of stored procedures. Other than that, they will not be able to do any modifications or read any data out of my database. So two functionalities. First is let's see how they are getting the data. So for this, I've got a Power Automate flow and it's very simple and straightforward. All it does is gets the PowerApps input, calls a SQL stored procedures and passes the response back to the PowerApps. So inside my app, I've got the drop-down list pre-populated when the screen is loaded. When the app is loaded, I've got a collection called reminder, which is yes or no. And in my screen, when the screen loads, I've got two collections. One is the rooms, which has got the drop-down list of the rooms, like Hydra, Spring, Shiloh. This is the room names. And I've got the session dates as a drop-down list. I could also fetch this from a pre-populated table in my database if I want, but for this simple use case, I've just hard-coded those values. And once I pass those drop-down lists in my search, when I click on search, the action is to create a collection. And that collection data is populated by calling this Power Automate flow. And I've got a Power Automate flow called get RM volunteers, which we have seen earlier. And it accepts 3 parameters. One is the room name, the second is the date, and the third one is the speaker name, which is optional. So if I pass blank, actually I change it back to handle nulls. I'll change it to an empty string. Otherwise, I'll just pass the text whatever is in my speaker text box. So when I call this flow, or when I click on the button, this flow is triggered and it calls this stored procedure by passing those 3 parameters: room, session date, and speaker, which is coming as an input from the Power App text boxes. And the response of this stored procedure comes back as a JSON string, and under advanced options I have defined the JSON body schema. It passes an array of objects, and in each object I have got the key value pairs of session code, session date, session type, speaker, title, actual start, and all the details that I was displaying on my edit screen as well. So I'm fetching all the required fields in just one single statement by passing in those three parameters for that stored procedure. So let's look at the stored procedure, how the flow get RM volunteers work. As I've said, it takes three parameters: the speaker, the session date, speaker, and the room. And it runs a select statement from my view. So all sessions was a view, as we have seen in demo 1. And I've got a table called room monitor, which has got the list of the additional details that I'm using when that I'm collecting from a volunteer. So all the room monitor details are like, number of attendees, whether they have set the reminders, if there were any issues logged, technical issues and non-technical issues. So all of this data is coming from this room monitor table. And as you observe, I'm actually joining from a couple of tables and fetching this data, actually a view and a table, and applying those filters that is coming from my stored procedure input, like the session date, the speaker, and the room. So this stored procedure is pretty much straightforward, and this returns this data set in a as a result set to my flow, and that flow passes on this result set back to my Power Apps, and that's how I'm getting that result set. And we can observe that collection as well. So this collection called session details, I can go back into my file and see what collections I've got. In here, session details, we can see all the columns that are displayed for those 5 sessions that is being returned by my stored procedure. All right, so that is the first step. Now the second step of this is to update the details. So when I click on log details, I want to make sure that I'm editing all these fields and saving those. So here, cancel is again very simple. It just navigates back to the old page, which is the get sessions room page. The save here does a bit of complex, not very complex actually. It just does a regex matching for my actual start date and end date. Make sure that my dates are in my times are in the right format, like they should not be more than uh, 24 hours, like 23 hours only. So those kind of checks. And once I have done those checks, I pass all the values, and also making sure that the volunteer name is not blank. So I know that who is entering the details. And after I perform these checks, that is my if condition, I call this flow, which is a set RM volunteers, and pass on all the parameters that is required for that flow. So in this case, actually I'm passing one value for each column, and that is how my stored procedure accepts those parameters. And finally, I say, okay, once I have set those values, I display a pop-up saying that what happened with that. So it says it will display that pop-up once my details are submitted. So let me just quickly demonstrate that as well. So here, if I click on save, you see that there would be a pop-up that comes, saying it's saved successfully. Right? And when I click on OK, it navigates back to my previous page. That's a small app functionality that we have, but the main part to understand here is how I am calling that save. Again, this is a simple call to my Power Apps Power Automate flow, which is set RM volunteers. And in my set RM volunteers, it looks similar to my get RM volunteers. So here I'm again triggering a Power Apps, triggering from Power Apps, and it calls a stored procedure which has many parameters, as you can see. And Once that stored procedure is executed, I'll just send a response back because I'm not returning a result set here. All I am saying is that stored procedure has run successfully. So I just respond and acknowledge the request has been completed. The flow has been completed after this flow finishes execution. And inside this stored procedure, I'll handle my inserts. So flow set RM volunteers. So these are the list of parameters that I need to pass to this stored procedure from Power Automate flow. And all these are, and this stored procedure just updates one record, which has got multiple columns, right? And inside here, I'm just running an update statement on my room monitor table. If that record exists, then I will do an insert update. If that record exists, I'll do an update. If it doesn't exist, then I'll do an insert. So if I'm entering the volunteer monitor room monitoring details for the first time, I will create a new record. So that's how this stored procedure is written, which is just updating or inserting a new record or an existing record. So this is good use case when you have just like one specific record that you want to update, not when you want to do multiple record updates, because you need to pass the record details for each, the column details for each record that you want to update. So what would be a better approach for doing that kind of updates? So that we will look in the next demo, in my third demo. So I hope this has answered many questions around how you can handle getting data from multiple tables and making sure that you don't give excessive permissions or permissions that you don't want, that is not required, to the users or in your Power App that have access to your tables and data sets, and inadvertently making any changes that they shouldn't be. So you control all your permissions by making sure that they perform only the actions that they are authorized to, by giving them access to specific stored procedures and execute those stored procedures only and perform specific actions. That brings to the end of the second demo. So let's now look at the third demo for more complex updates and inserts by using PowerApps and Power Automate flow. In this third demo, we will look at how we can actually do bulk updates across multiple tables. So I'll take an example of one of the real world scenarios where this app was built for one of the clients, basically for capturing and tracking the goals throughout the year. So as a staff member, I need to set at least three goals, three specific goals actually, a fixed number of goals, one of each type of goal. And once I save all the details, I can keep updating it till the point where I need to submit my goals. There is also an approval process, but we'll not be looking at as part of this application. What we'll see is how you can submit the application, which needs to be updating multiple records at the same time. So let's actually take a demo of how this app works, the functionality, and then we'll look at how technically this was implemented. So this is the landing page. Of course, we'll have some logos, branding, and all those things, but for this demo purposes, I've just stripped off everything that is not required. So as a staff member, I'll first open the app and then click on new or edit application. So I may have saved applications that I want to edit, or I may be starting a new application altogether. So in this case, I don't have an existing application. So I'll just, when I click on this, it actually creates a blank template for me. It already pre-populates my name, and this information is fetched from my Office 365 connection. And it gets the default date as today's date and the review number. And this could be like anything. It could be an year number or those kind of things. So as an example, I'm just taking a review number, say 1, and then I say I need to complete all my goals by end of January next year. And there are three types of goals I need to set. One is a personal goal, a professional goal, and a career goal. And all of this information is sent from SQL. So I'll just show later on how that is implemented. So for this, I'll just put in some sample values. I'll not put in the actual values, but it's important that we populate all these fields and come back at a later date to handle like if I'm making any changes before I submit my final goal. So this is kind of draft that I want to write. And once I've finished all these details, what I'll do is instead of submitting this goals I've made from the template, I've filled some default values. I'll just click on save. So what this gives me a pop-up, and here it says form saved, not yet submitted for review. So you can return at any time, update and complete your form. So as an employee, I'll have one form I need to fill with 3 goals. And finally, once all the goals are set, I can come back multiple times to make sure that I'm putting my goals correctly, not those random text. And then finally submit my goals for approval. So in this case, I've just saved it. I'm not going to submit it yet. Now at a later date, I come back to this application, click on edit application, and it fetches the details from the data that I've entered last time. And here what I'll do is I'll not change any of those goals. Maybe I'll just add an additional number on the goal title. And then here say, okay, this is very too soon. I don't want to do it by then, probably by end of March. All right, and then again save it, not submit it yet. I can go back to my saved application by clicking on the new edit application again. And this will reflect my changes, like I've added 1, 2, and 3 to my goal titles. So this is just saving my status, and I can still make edits to my goals. At this stage, I am comfortable with all my goals and go ahead and submit my my goals. So when I submit the goals, this will be submitted for approval, and we can observe that the message has changed and it says updated and submitted successfully. Now, once I've submitted my goals, I need to make sure that I'll not be able to edit my goals anymore. So at this stage, when I click on my new or edit application, it doesn't show me options to actually edit my goals. And the only option that I've got is go view the goals and go back to my home screen. So these are the only two things. So I'm restricting and making sure that my goals is set to submitted and no longer available for editing. Right? So that's the functionality that I want to cover here. So let's see how that is implemented. So I'll exit my app. And in here, so let's go through the app and how I have make sure that when I am submitting a new or saved application, it is letting me edit, otherwise it's not letting me edit. So that is actually handled by a flag based on the field that is coming from my result set from the database. So if we see, I'll select the item, and inside my gallery I've got these like text fields like text strategy or so that and I will. And if you observe the display mode of my text box, it is set to a variable called new form edit status. And this new form edit status is set based on a specific field value that is coming from my database. So when I'm navigating from my home page to my goals page, here I am setting that the edit status based on the form status that is coming from my result set. So if my form status is saved, then I will let saved or new form. Then I'll set the display mode to edit. Otherwise, I'll set the display mode to view. Here, I'm also setting another variable, new form view status, and this is also based on these values, but indirectly through the edit status field variable. So new edit status, if it is edit mode, then I say the view status is true. If it is not in edit, like if it is not editable, that is already submitted, then I say the view status is false. And I'm using this view status to show specific buttons in my goals screen, or the screen where I'm editing the goals. Here you can see there is a save button, and that is not visible. And the visible status here, there is a property called visible, and in this I've set it to the view status. So that means if my new form view status is false, that means I'll not be able to see this button. So that button is not visible anymore on my screen. So that's how I'm managing read-only bits based on the values that is returned from my result set when I'm fetching the data. And so now let's get back to the first part, where how I'm fetching this data. So here again, before we get to the point where how to understand how we are fetching the data, first we need to understand the database structure behind this. I've got two main tables for this database, or for this application. There are some metadata tables, like approval status. I've got some fixed values, and the form status, which is like again set of fixed values like saved, submitted, expired. And there are some additional tables like reflections, which is for more like peer review scenarios. But the main tables that I'm using for this demo is the goals table and the person table. So each person has got one form they can fill and be active. So I've got a table which has got the form details, like the form ID, when was the form created, who's the staff, their email, the year level, the date of completion, and all the other details, right? The approval status and all those things. And the goals is more granular. Like for each form, there will be 3 set of goals. So there is a goal ID and a foreign key from my IC goals, referencing to my person table. And the goal type, the goal title, and all the other fields that is required to add my goal in this table. All right. So a person has got one form, and in each form they have got multiple goals, right? So there's one-to-many relationship here. Now, when I'm fetching the data, I need to get 3 records for each form, and each person can fill only one form. So it's a join between 2 tables. So to get the data, I am I'm calling a Power Automate flow called get GC forms flow v2, and this just passes the username and says it's a new form as a parameter, and these are the only 2 parameters it requires to get the data about the new form, right? Even though if it's saved, it's still fetched as a new form. That's when I was developing, I was just concentrating on new form. That's why there's a parameter there. But otherwise, it will also fetch the saved forms. So get GC forms flow v2. So let's look at that flow here. Again, this is similar to what we have done in the second demo. A PowerApps trigger, calling a stored procedure, passing 2 parameters, and returning a JSON string as an output. The JSON string has got an array of objects. So here also it is returning multiple rows. So in this case, especially for this particular use case, it's always 3 records that it returns. And this stored procedure again is straightforward. It just takes 2 parameters and runs a select statement. So the stored procedure is get IC goals form. So here is my stored procedure. It takes 2 parameters and works on a cutoff date, and the parameter that I'm passing in here, like the new form. So this is where it checks if there is a form. If there is a form that exists, then it will get the data directly from those tables. And it is joining multiple tables like the person table, the goals table, and some metadata tables, reference tables like the form status and the approval status, and passes those parameters like the staff name, and the source is new form, which is used for the filter. And if the record doesn't exist, I need to pass a new record, right? So this is something that doesn't exist. So I'll pass the blank value, and some default values. Um, like the goal ID is 0, so I'll just pass it's a new goal, it's a new form. And the date of completion is the get date and the form date. This is how I'll be setting my default values. And I'm also doing a join, or actually a cross apply kind of join, to create three goals. So basically I'm setting one goal of each type. So I know there is definitely going to be three goals. One is personal, professional, and career goal. So I'll be generating a dummy dataset, which is all empty values, to be used as a template for creating my new goals. So this is how all the blank values were passed on to my template when I'm starting a new form. And if that all right, so this is getting the data set, right? So it also passes the status or overall form status as well, whether it's saved or whether it's submitted. So all those details are passed by using this stored procedure. All right. Now, coming to the second part, once I get these details, I'm not going to save anything there. So now in this screen, I'm just getting the data from the Power Automate flow by calling the stored procedure. I'm setting some default variables. So like the form ID, which is which I'm getting from the record result set, the year level, the date of completion, the overall status, and the edit status. Edit status and view status is mostly used for setting flags. The overall status is also used for that, which is used in this next function there for setting the value. And then once I have got that collection, then I'm creating a collection for the goals. So out of this collection, which has got all my data, including the form and the goals, I'm just extracting the columns for that is related to the goals into a separate collection called goals collection. And then I'm navigating to my goals screen. So now in my app demo new application, which is my goals screen, here I've got a couple of functionalities. One is save and one is submit. So on my save, let's switch back to on select property. This is where the complex operation comes into play. So to do bulk updates, I want to update multiple records. That means I need to pass those multiple records as a parameter to my stored procedure. So the way that I have implemented this is combine all the fields into a JSON string, and it's basically a list of JSON objects. So that's how I have created or generated a JSON for once JSON string for the person table or the form table, and one JSON string which is a list of all my goals. So if you look at the JSON, if you look at my JSON string, this here I've got an example. So I'm creating a form, the first form. So I've got my details here. This is at the form level, like the person table. And then I've got three goals. So I've got my goal 1, which is that one. And then I've got my goal 2. And then I've got my goal 3. So you get the idea, right? So this is basically a list of JSON objects, which has got the key value pairs for each column. So essentially a JSON string, which is a list of my goals. And the form is also of the similar format, but it will always contain one record. The goals will always contain 3 records. And These are the parameters that I'm passing to my insert goals stored procedure. Basically two parameters for the person string and the goal string. And those JSON strings I need to build in my Power App because that is where I'm getting the data from. So all this data that I've got here at the form level, its name, email ID, and all those things. At the goals level, I need to create a collection of all these three goals. So let's look at how I'm building that. So in here, I'll format text. If I can do it. Format text. No, that's the best format it can get. All right. So all I'm doing here is I'm actually setting the person string. So which is the form ID. Again, you can see the JSON format here. So that is how I'm building the string. The form ID and the value of the form ID, staff name and the username, staff email and the user email. And all these variables are set from the first screen when I'm navigating to my second screen. The username and user email is set when the form is loaded for the first time or the app is loaded for the first time, which gets my username and email ID from my Office 365 details, Office 365 connection. The year level is the text that I'm entering here, like the review number. So that's the year level parameter here. The date of completion is I need to verify something here, making sure that it's in a Australian date format. So I have selected I've got the data from the selected date from the drop down list or the date display field, and from there I'm setting the format, and that's how I set the string for my person str. And because this is a save button, I'm setting the form status as saved. Similarly, for goals, I'll use a for all function. So for all loops through all the goals items in the goals gallery or the collection here, and then patch. So basically, whatever fields I'm updating, I am updating those fields, but not in the database directly, but within the gallery itself on all the items. So once I have updated internally into my collection, I will use that collection and build a string by using concat and mid. So concat actually concatenates. It's similar to like concatenating strings, but it will loop through the collection here. So for the concat, I pass the collection as my input and say for each item in this collection, build this string which starts with goals, a goal type and all those things. So I'm just creating a concat string, and I'm also substituting special characters. I was entering like multiple lines of text, semicolons, single quotes, and those kind of things. I need to make sure that all those special characters are handled, like the backslash. So I use a function called substitute, which will check for any new line characters or carriage returns, and then replace that with slash or slash r slash n, and also replace any single quote characters. And once all of that is done, I have put a limit of text to like 200,000 characters. I know that that's more than enough for 3 goals. And at the end, close my JSON string. So I'm basically constructing my JSON string inside here. And once I have constructed both my strings, the goal string and the person string, I'll pass them to my stored procedure, which is insert gc form flow v2, and I'll update a context of status. That is nothing but the data that is returned from this stored procedure. And if you observe in my SQL script, I'm returning a status message, a status variable or status value, which is either saved or submitted. So that is the status that I'm returning to my, that is the status, like the text here, like when it is saved, not submitted and those things, and when it is submitted, it's actually an updated, submitted successfully. So that status is returned from this status variable here, and I use that variable to display on my pop-up screen. So in the return pop-up, in my pop-up that displays with the message, I'm using the status variable to display that message that is coming from my stored procedure again. So now, after you understand how this stored procedure works, how this button click logic works, I'm just building the JSON strings, passing it to my stored procedure, and return and saving the status that is written by my stored procedure into a variable. The similar logic is applied to my submit as well. So let's look at the button submit. So in here also I'm doing the same operations, but I'm and when I call this, I'm also calling the same stored procedure, insert GC form flow v2. Because this is submit, that's the reason I need to have a separate button and say the form status is actually submitted, not saved. Okay. So that's the only difference between these two buttons. And we have seen, like, once it is submitted, how we are using the form status and those variables. There is also a pop-up that I was telling about. So return status, this is the pop-up. And here I've got a label, which is not displayed here, of course. And when I see this is the status that is being returned by that stored procedure, I'm saving it to a status variable and displaying that as a label on my pop-up. And on my return OK, all I am doing is disabling that pop-up, so setting that pop-up status to false and then navigating back to my landing page. All right, so that's how this app is designed, and that's how the flow works. So let's take a brief look at how my insert stored procedure is written. So in my insert stored procedure, I'm passing these parameters to my stored procedure. I'm checking if actually the JSON string is passed correctly or not, and if I'm actually getting any result or not. If there is a result, then I'm inserting so if the form ID is 0, that means I'm inserting this form for the first time. In that case, I will actually do an insert, not updates. And here, if you observe, I'm actually reading the JSON string to a table format and inserting the data into my person table first and output my form ID. And once that form ID is generated, I'll use that form ID in my goals insertion script. And here I'm reading the JSON string goals str and inserting the form ID from the output that is extracted from my insert here. It's similar to like handling a new identity value that is being inserted, right? So first I insert the person table and then I insert into my goals table. So I'm actually doing insert into a couple of tables here, and that is all handled by passing the JSON string and inserting that by using a stored procedure. And once that insert is finished, I'll return a form status as saved, and also the message that is so based on the form status, like if it is saved, when they have clicked saved, I will return like form is saved but it is not submitted. So this was the message for my pop-up. And if it is not saved, like if it is submitted, then I'll just say inserted successfully or submitted successfully. Similarly, what about updates? So this is when the form doesn't exist. If the form exists, again, it's just an update. So based on the form ID, I will update the person table, and from the goals string, the JSON string, based on the goal ID, I'll update the goals. So that's how my goals and person table are updated. And I always need to make sure that this happens in a transaction to make sure that both the tables are updated. So that's why I've got a transaction wrapped around these inserts and updates. And finally, I'll return the status whether it's saved or submitted here also when it is updating rather than inserting a new record. That is all what my stored procedure does. And hope that has explained some scenarios where you can use this type of updates or using JSON strings to work around bulk updates across multiple tables from your Power Apps with making sure that all the security guardrails are in place. That brings to the end of my session, and hopefully I have covered all the best practices around when you're working with database and making sure that your data is secured, you're not giving additional permissions just for the functionality, and making sure that you achieve optimal performance so that you don't fetch all the data in and apply right filters. So it's the same Similar things that you do with your reporting or your front-end applications, just a bit differently when you're using Power Apps and Power Automate. With low code, no code, there is still some code that you have to handle in the backend, which is in your SQL Server. Once you have got the stored procedures, then you can literally do all your operations by using the user interface rather than writing any code. There is still some bits of code like where you are building the JSON string, but that there is a very small learning curve there. Other than that, it's pretty much straightforward and very easy to build applications with your Power Apps and Power Automate flow. Thank you for attending the session. I'll switch back to my slide deck for the last thank you slide. Thank you for attending my session. I was able to cover some best practices around DB database, using database in your Power Apps and Automate. You can always feel free to reach me on my Twitter handle, ManuSQL Now I'll switch to my live version and answer any questions that you have. Thank you, everyone. Let's answer some questions.